Very well, thank you. So the problem that we started off with the drug discovery unit was that some of my colleagues here in the University of Dundee were doing research into parasites and were finding potential drug targets, but they didn't have a way to take those drug targets and to turn them into drug discovery projects. So a group of us went to the Wellcome Trust and applied for a grant to set up a drug discovery program that was focused around human African trypanosomiasis, or was more commonly called African sleeping sickness. And we got that grant in, we went to get the grant sometime in 2004 or 2005. The grant was awarded in 2005, and then we started the drug discovery unit in around about early 2006. It was officially opened by Gordon Brown, who was then Chancellor of the Exchequer, on the 23rd of January 2006, which is exactly 20 years ago today. So the vision was to be able to do professional drug discovery, sort of industry-style drug discovery on drug targets for neglected tropical diseases. And the first one we looked at, as I said, was human African trypanosomiasis. So we had a grant of 5 years from the Wellcome Trust to focus on this. Somewhere along the lines, we then got some funding from Drugs for Neglected Disease Initiative to work on visceral leishmaniasis or leishmaniasis. And then we started expanding into other disease areas. So we got some funding to work on malaria, and then we got some funding from the Medical Research Council, and that funding allowed us to set up what we call the innovative targets, which was looking at drug targets in a variety of different disease areas across the university. So we looked at some antibacterial targets and various other drug targets and cancer drug targets. And the drug discovery unit grew from then. So when we started off in 2006, in January 2006, there were just 3 of us in the drug discovery unit essentially. Myself, Julie Frierson, who was head of biology, and somebody called Ruth Brenk, who was head of computational chemistry. We then expanded. We then recruited people. The first person we recruited was Paul Wyatt, who became the head of the drug discovery unit, and then we started recruiting chemists, biologists, and then I think our first people started in 2006. We got up to a strength of about 20 people, probably sometime at the end of 2007. I mean, I think what we wanted to do was very novel, and the university took a risk because a lot of the primary drivers from this was not necessarily new scientific articles and papers, but was to try and find drug candidates. It was a very different model, and the principal at the time and the people at the head of the School of Life Sciences were incredibly supportive, and I think it was probably Wellcome hadn't seen anything quite like it either, but again they were very supportive. So it was something that hadn't been done before, as far as I'm aware, but we had a lot of support from people to help us to do it, and I guess it was like an experiment, but I don't think any of us envisaged when we started the grant and the project in 2006 that we would be here 20 years later with about 130 staff working across so many different projects. So it's been a very exciting journey, a lot of learning along the way, a lot of things we've had to put into place and learn lots of things, a lot of brilliant collaborators, and we've had a lot of support from funding agencies and organisations like Medicines for Malaria Venture and Drugs for Neglected Diseases, and we've had a fantastic group of scientists. Well, I think the people that come to work are, we get people from a variety of different disciplines. So we come people from a whole lot of different disciplines: chemistry, biochemistry, molecular biology, cell biology, pharmacology, etc., and computational side of things as well. And there are people who are passionate about doing drug discovery, and we've had a lot of people who are very interested in some of the things we've been doing in infectious diseases, as well as some of the other areas. I think everybody's very keen on learning about developing drugs for unmet medical need. And we've had people that we've recruited from industry, and at the beginning that's primarily we recruited people who had industrial experience, but now we've also recruited a lot of people who've come out of university, so people with BScs, PhDs, postdoctoral experience, and they've learnt drug discovery as they've come along within the unit. Well, I think some key successes along the line. I think the first program that we got to a preclinical candidate, which was the malaria program, and that was a program that we started with funding from a Medicines for Malaria venture. So that funded a small screen. So we tested a small library of compounds against malaria. We then found some chemical start points from that, and from that we got a compound that turned into a preclinical candidate, and that compound then went to back to Medicines for Malaria venture when we got the preclinical candidate. So the preclinical candidate is the compound that we think could go into human clinical trials. The Medicines for Malaria venture then passed it on to the pharmaceutical company Merck, the German Merck, and they then took it through the relevant regulatory studies to enable it to go into humans, and it's now gone into human clinical trials, and that was incredibly exciting. I think other key moments were getting the funding from the Medical Research Council to allow us to start what's now become the Innovative Targets portfolio. So that's where we have the non-communicable, non-infectious disease work, so things like the neurosciences and the women's health. And another key moment, I think, was getting the joint funding with GSK around the kinetoplasty project. So we've had a really good collaboration with GSK since 2011. So that's been incredibly productive. So we have 2 compounds from there that have gone into clinical trials. So that's been a really exciting collaboration. I think when we started off, we wanted to have the biology and the chemistry together, and the computational sciences. I think what made a big shift was bringing in the drug metabolism and pharmacokinetics work. So that was, we recruited Kevin Reed in about 2008 to set up the drug metabolism and pharmacokinetics group, and that did make a very big difference. I mean, almost immediately that team came in and started operating. We were able to progress our drugs projects much faster, so that was one key bit. And I think another key moment has been the mode of action group that Susan Wiley leads. I mean, that was started in 2015, and that's made a huge difference, particularly to what we're doing in infectious diseases, where her team works out how a compound is actually killing a parasite or a pathogen, and that's been really useful in terms of how we do our drug discovery. So those have been 2 sort of key moments, but there are obviously lots of small moments along the road as well. Well, I mean, I think the malaria compound going into phase 2 clinical studies, so it's just completed phase 2 clinical studies in Africa, and those were obviously done by Merck, but to actually have a compound that's gone into humans and is why we're all here is to try and get compounds that will cure diseases, and it's exciting to see other compounds that we've got progressing along the lines to get to there. So I think, you know, that's the biggest success, but there's been lots of other successes as well. But that's the one, you know, and I was personally very, very involved with that malaria compound. So obviously, to me, it has you know, a personal interest. It's like, you know, very almost like a child, if you like. I think what's special about it, of course, is the people. I mean, you know, there's no one person can do it. Solve drug discovery. You need a team of people. It's a hugely collaborative environment. So I think that's really critical, and the fact that all the teams are integrated. So you have in a given team, say for example in the tuberculosis, you have chemists and biologists and computational scientists, and having those people working together, I think, is really important. And actually, from personally, what I like about drug discovery, one of the things, apart from the fact that, you know, the main thing is that there's going to be patient benefit at the end, is what we're aiming for. But also in terms of, you know, the scientific interest is actually interacting with people from other disciplines, and it's an incredibly complicated jigsaw puzzle of drug discovery. So, you know, working with, you know, trying to understand the biology, the pharmacology, the chemistry, etc., is really challenging. It's actually, you know, incredibly intellectually demanding. Yeah, well, of course. I mean, you know, people who go into drug discovery, you know, there's more things that fail than make it. A lot more that fail than make it. And, you know, I think we've come up with several projects where we've gone quite a long way, and we've had to stop projects. And that's hard when you put a lot of effort into a project to stop it. But, you know, when there's no point pushing something that you can't see a way to get to the end, and you know, things like, you know, there are often unexpected things come along, like unexpected toxicology or whatever, you know, where you find there's a toxic side effect to the compound, you know, that you have to stop it before it goes any further, because obviously you can't, you know, your compounds have to be safe. I think having the mode of action group, so Susan Weiler's group that looks at how compounds work, has been very good in trying to reduce that attrition, or to be able to weed out projects that are not going to make it earlier in the pipeline. And that actually is really important, because, you know, you can stop something that's not going to get, if you can stop something early, you know, you haven't spent so much time, and you can actually focus on something that is more likely to make it through. I think what we want to be known for is getting compounds to address unmet clinical need into the clinic. So using innovative science and scientific thought to develop new medicines to the point where we can partner them to somebody who can take them into clinical trials. We can't do the clinical trials bit, but we can take them to what we call a preclinical candidate. This is a molecule we think is the one that should go onwards. And I think if we can, what I think we should be known for is primarily, well, lots of things, but the real goal is getting compounds that go into have patient benefit. Well, I think, I'm not sure I could say opportunity. I mean, there's a really big need in infectious diseases, which is, I think, what we have 70% of what we're doing is infectious diseases. So I think there's some real big challenges there. So things like tuberculosis, drug-resistant bacteria, antifungals, then we've schistosomiasis. They're all big problems that we need, you know, that need addressing. but you know, there's other things. You know, we're interested in looking at women's health. It's an area that there's very little work being done on medicines for women's diseases like endometriosis, and you know, things like the neurosciences. Again, you know, there's very complex diseases, and you know, not simple. You know, there's a lot of work and needed to try and develop drugs for these diseases, and you know, they're a massive problem to society. I think the success, you know, will be getting preclinical candidates. It will be, I think, for us to have that success, we need to keep up technologically with what's going on. There's a lot of new technology coming, and I think it's important that we keep up with that and implement and use new technology and the best ideas in what we're doing, that we use the best science that we can, because drug discovery is really complicated and hard, and as I said, you know, most drug discovery projects fail along the line, so using the best science is really important to try and make sure your compounds and your projects get to a satisfactory conclusion. So I think that's a really big challenge, I mean, that everybody in drug discovery faces. I think the most important thing is to have the right people in the unit who have the ideas and the passion and to do the drug discovery. I think it's important to have the right collaborators as well. I mean, we've been fortunate to have a really amazing set of collaborators, and to make sure that you work, you know, with the best science that you can. I think those are the key areas. I think if you don't do that, then you're putting yourself at a huge disadvantage. Right, well, thank you very much.